Good evening. This is the Long Hill Report. I'm Gus Steeves, and we kind of, as you can literally see, we have changed seats today. We're reversing the issues here a little bit. I'm interviewing Richard today on his new book, She Searches for Monsters to Destroy, which, quite frankly, reading through it, it's kind of a capsule history of American foreign policy. His subtitle is America and the Eternal Recurrence of Unnecessary Wars, which pretty much describes it all. And personally, I would call it She Creates Monsters to Later Destroy. Although obviously I know where you're getting the quote. It's a John Quincy Adams quote from 1821, which is right on the cover. And so it's interesting, read through this, and there's so many different elements of the storyline of American history that, quite frankly, are very repetitive. We keep tripping over the same tripwires every few years.
You can say that.
We keep tripping over the same tripwires every few years.
And he did.
And it's interesting. It's like, and I think a lot of it is because of the fact that we tend to select traitorous sociopaths as allies, and then we're really surprised when they betray us. I don't know if you. I know you go online. You read some of the same sites I do, and I've seen some of them referring to people who support the face-eating leopards party, and then they're shocked when their own faces get eaten. Yeah. It's the same thing. So we'll start off with a kind of few generalities here. What made you want to write this book?
Well, it kind of grew in my mind, and I'm not exactly completely sure. It's just, I enlisted in the Army. Mm-hmm. Partly because I didn't know what else to do at the time, but also I was on the team. Mm-hmm. I thought opposing communism in Southeast Asia was part of the post-World War II thing. We are the world, democracy, all that, mm-hmm. and communism was totalitarian. And I think it's switching now to be corporativist, especially, say, in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. But it was the party in Vietnam was not going to tolerate the South Vietnam regime for too long after we left. And we had to keep the democracy and save the democracy. So South Vietnam, I get out of the Army, South Vietnam collapses, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we blew this. We've lost it. The whole thing is gone. The domino effect, all of this. And then the dominoes didn't domino.
Nope.
North Vietnamese didn't get into 100,000 sampans, sail off up and come around and come up the Potomac. It was if they changed their phone number and we left no forwarding address.
Pretty much.
And we have had no problem with Vietnam since. We've had absolutely no problem. Now, would I want to live under the Vietnamese government as it is? I'm not sure, because I have people have gone there and said, "Hey, it's great," mm-hmm. but it might be because I'm American, and things have changed. But it was better that we didn't, because what would have been the consequences if we had fought the North Vietnamese to a standstill, like we had fought the North Koreans? Mm-hmm. We would have meetings on the border forever.
Pretty much.
All the scams that took place, the Swiss banks would be awash forever. Mm-hmm. And we'd be draining our budget to completely always retrain the South Vietnamese. It was...
Instead of constantly retraining the Iraqis or the Afghanis, which is pretty much what we did.
Yeah, well, actually, I think it would probably have been a little more orderly in South Vietnam, but we are really confused in Iraq, in the Middle East. We are really confused. So it is better, much better, that we did not win in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And I wrote another article about it. I called it our only victory. None of it appears in the book. Mm-hmm. Our only victory of the 20th century. Because it was the only place we could execute an exit strategy.
In Vietnam?
Vietnam.
I think you did mention that in passing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
And actually, to tie right into that, you on page 134, you mentioned, you note the U.S. claimed that the VCs and the National Liberation Front were controlled by Hanoi, and their own claim that to be independent and to be mostly non-communist. What I think is interesting is that we always seem to assume that local rebels have no agency outside our global conflicts because our policy is so dualistic. And that often pushes them into the hands of the enemy forces. Why do you think that is, and what would it take to fix it?
I don't want to fix it. Here's
Why?
the thing. Well, it's a neutralist book.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to be bugging people to be good Democrats, good Republicans, good capitalists, good communists. I don't want to be bugging them at all.
Mm-hmm.
We have two. I mentioned in the book the long-term French ambassador's description of America.
Mm-hmm.
On one coast, to the east, it has fish. To the west, it has fish. To the north, a weak enemy. To the south, a weak enemy. Who can bug us if we don't? We can bug a lot of people.
We have.
We can. I think I've made that point.
Yeah.
All we need is a navy.
You mentioned that at the end,
Yeah.
toward the end of the book. Yeah.
I believe we should have a Swiss form of army because if we don't have something like that, somebody will think, like, what's her name, Albright? What was her first name? Madeleine Albright said to Colin Powell, what's the good of this wonderful army you have if you can't use it?
Yeah.
Madeleine, don't be stupid. Well, I can't stop that.
But the problem is that the people in power often tend to be. That's the problem.
And I shouldn't pick only on Madeleine, and
No.
I'm sure you I won't, and I'm sure you I didn't.
No, you didn't. That's true. That is true. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, that so many of our, as you also point out here, if I can find the line, that a lot of the special relationships we have never work to the benefit of the United States. The people we seem to choose to be our representatives or to be our allies, as I mentioned at the very beginning, don't really benefit the United States because we are selecting people who almost by definition betrayed their own people, and then we expect them to be loyal to us. Why would they?
That's a good question. I think
by definition, they're not going to be.
I think it answers itself.
I think it does too.
But there's a reason for a bit for this. Somebody's making money.
Oh, absolutely.
And Eisenhower became a Republican. Or he got into politics.
Mm-hmm.
And he stated, I don't want us to become isolationist again.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the word isolationist bugs the hell out of me.
Because it's not true.
Well, I mean,
We've never been isolationist.
Nobody's going to be. I'm for a neutralist country.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's never going to be a fortress America where we just pull up the. This is all foolish, and where somebody is getting rich.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
That sure isn't us.
No. In the words of George Carlin, it's a big club and you ain't in it.
Yep, that's for sure. Which actually, you mentioned the whole idea of kind of being neutralist, and we'll kind of jump back to the kind of toward the beginning. We were talking about the Barbary Wars. I know in the past you have mentioned that you consider that to be one of the very few legitimate wars that we've had.
Yeah.
What's interesting though is that if you think about it, North Africa and the Mediterranean had been a hotbed of piracy for centuries, and often tacitly backed by all of the powers there. That's why it's continued. And our leaders had to know that. What were we actually there for? You don't actually mention that. You don't actually talk about why we were there.
I do.
What were we trading there? I mean, we were trading, but why were we there?
Well,
when they weren't attacking our shores, they weren't. I mean, they're 4,000 miles.
Ships.
They were 4,000 miles in there.
The ships were trading.
Why were they there?
They were there as trading ships. So say I'm an American sailor.
Yeah.
I work my way up, and I'm now at a point where I can, with partners, build or buy a trading ship. I should have the right to freedom of navigation in international waters.
In theory, that's true.
The Barbary pirates were not allowing that. Now, the European situation was a little more fluid. So, Spain and France are at war. The Barbary pirates are attacking Spanish shipping, and this is a theoretical. The English wink at the Barbary pirates, even though next year they'll attack English ships, and the Spanish will wink at that. But this was post-revolution, our revolution. We just wanted to navigate. We didn't want to fight the Barbaries. We didn't let us go. All is good. And they weren't willing to accept that. Now, this is a little bit of a situation in that in the Baltic, or in the border to the Baltic, is Denmark.
Yeah.
And they have little islands, so you have to go through Baltic territory.
Yeah.
I mean, Danish territory to get anywhere east or west. And they charged a toll.
Yeah, people do that all over the place, in various places.
Now,
Land,
basically,
sea.
the Barbary pirates said, we are charging you a toll. The only one that had even a close rationale for that was the Moroccan government. And they were one of our first allies. They were the first to ever recognize us.
I know.
And we had a good relationship. They say, hey, come on, give us a break, give us something here. And that was a good rationale, relatively speaking. It's almost as good as the King of Denmark's. But Algiers, Tunis, these were just pirates. They were pirate nations. They were just, mafioso.
But the British were doing exactly the same thing in the Caribbean.
As
were the Spanish, as were we.
Where were they charging tolls?
They weren't necessarily charging tolls, but they were committing piracy.
Well, I mean,
often against the Spanish.
Maybe they were, but not at that point in history. They were the British had gotten past that by that point,
Maybe.
And they were not. Before that, during the Elizabethan era and after that, it was wink wink. It's basically letters of marque, private license to privateer.
Yeah,
so it was a different situation completely.
Yeah, it's still mercenaries are still.
So are you saying that it was illegitimate?
I have to wonder. I really honestly have to wonder. I mean, we could have been trading with pretty much anyone else in the world, and with almost no issues because we're on the other side of the ocean. We didn't necessarily need to be in the Mediterranean.
Traders go to the markets.
That's true, but we could have also gone to China. They had a market too.
And we did go to China.
And we did. Right.
But we had to go. We had to ride the with a reasonable amount of seacoast. The Barbaries, the Barbary states had a right to claim certain amount of water as theirs, like we have a 12 or 200 mile limit or whatever we have. They did not have a right to say we can raid into the Atlantic. And at that time, they were actually raiding up to Iceland. So, I mean, these were not nice people. And
they weren't the only ones who were doing it.
Who was raiding up to Iceland?
As you mentioned, we were talking about a few minutes ago, depends on what time frame you're looking at.
And it's wrong to be raiding.
The British were doing it, the Spanish were doing it, the French were doing it.
It's wrong to be raiding anyway.
But they were doing it.
Doesn't matter. It's wrong to do it, and we have a right to freedom of navigation. It is a basic important thing.
Then why didn't the Europeans take them out? When they'd been dealing with them for 500
corrupt,
years.
They were stupid, corrupt governments. And we are pure of heart.
Yeah. As our policy later proved, we were not.
Yeah, but I will argue. We probably have to agree to disagree on this.
Probably.
Now, how about on the Quasi-War, which was the other one? I think we had a right to resist. We couldn't go to war for England at that point.
It would have looked a little weird, yes.
It would have ended in complete defeat.
Probably would have. But then again, honestly, if we had, other than doing a naval battles against the French, if we had really gone to war with France, we probably would have gotten our.
And that's why
too,
we were just resisting.
Yeah.
And it was a naval war of resistance, and that And the war in 1812 is where we learned a lot about naval warfare.
Sure.
And that's why we could eventually defeat very easily the Barbary pirates. Is because we learned a naval.
And that's probably true. One of the interesting things you mentioned about speaking of 1812 is that you noted the Treaty of Ghent's statement that the true losers were the indigenous tribes under the Treaty of Ghent.
Absolutely.
And the problem is that they've always been,
Yes.
as far as our foreign policy is
Yes.
gone. I think it's interesting that if you really think about it, although we declared the Monroe Doctrine as protection for the peoples of the Americas, that the Native Americans were never protected.
I absolutely agree with this, but my main focus is foreign wars.
But they were under U.S. law, Native tribes are sovereign nations. Therefore, they are technically foreign wars.
Technically.
Yet that we violated something like 400 Native treaties, and they were the first ones to show or to understand better than anyone else, and the Europeans and the Russians and other people are starting to see that now, is that our government is not agreement capable. Because we violated the treaties all the time.
It's been observed in every government that a treaty will only be enforced if it can be enforced. And so I'll agree with you. I don't have another, I'm working on another book, and if I have to go back and do another 100-pager, that is covered. I'm not arguing with you. I'm agreeing with you.
That's good.
So, and there's some great books that are interesting to read, like Empire of the Summer Moon about the Cheyenne,
I've got that one. That's a
and
good
the one about the Osage, the murders, the Osage murders, early in the century.
I haven't read that one.
I can't remember the title. I did review it. It was a good book.
Okay.
But Louis L'Amour said about, and we're not talking about the Indians, but I'll digress here. Louis L'Amour said about how amazing, what do you call it? Horsemen they were. And they had an embryo of an empire in this
the
book.
Comanche? Yeah.
No, not the Comanche. I'm talking about the Plains Indians, all of them.
All of them could have. Comanche
What
was
he
one of the ones
said
that
they
came close to doing
lacked
it. Yeah.
was a Genghis Khan.
There's probably some truth to that.
It's absolute truth that somebody had to be able to unite all of the tribes.
Probably true.
And
yeah.
I think there were probably the language difficulty might have had something, because it was English, and there were lots of Indian languages.
They did, although interestingly, the Plains tribes actually had most of them had a common sign language.
Yeah, but I mean,
I don't know how effective that would be for empire building.
Empire building,
trade language.
That's Rome went from Britain to way to the east. And they weren't going like this, That would be a study. You could get your PhD out of that. But yeah, the basic thing is they could not weld themselves into one people.
That's basically, if anything, ironically, dealing with us, and since then, has probably given them the closest semblance of a single person, a single people status that they've ever had.
Quite so.
Which is interesting. And that's usually the case. It's usually something in opposition to somebody else, unfortunately. How do you think that if we had dealt with these tribes as truly sovereign nations, how do you think that would have changed our foreign policy history?
First of all, I don't know how on the cards that was, but let's posit it was. If we could have come to an early amicable system of dealing with them, well, might have been an impetus to much more war. But maybe not. I have no answer.
It might have resulted in, I think it might have resulted in a North America that is far less unified. Because we'd probably have multiple nation states scattered across the continent.
I don't think that was.
I don't know if that would happen or not.
I don't think that was going to be possible.
I don't know.
our Civil War was between, and I don't get into the Civil War, obviously.
Yeah, I see that.
Was between actually two countries.
Yeah.
And when they came back as one country, they were only going to be one country. And the population imbalance was always against the Indian.
Well, that is true. And to some degree, the technology was too, although some of them picked up our technology very quickly.
Some of them did.
Yeah, interesting. To kind of, your section talking about the Monroe Doctrine, I thought was interesting when you cite the fact that we were objecting to, quote, the interposition for the purpose of opposing them, oppressing them, or controlling in any other matter their destiny. But in practice, that was as long as we were the ones doing it.
Yeah. I mean, well, remember
when did that change?
We had just lost a war when John Quincy Adams said, we weren't going to war with anybody. And when he wrote that, because we'd already basically, we were broke.
True.
And so we had to gather strength before and that changed a lot.
It changed almost immediately, yeah.
It's changed, and we've gone so far that I think that without changing it now, it could be fatal.
I agree completely.
And
very much so.
I mean, the absurdity of the Ukraine situation. I was just morning, I'm listening on WBUR, the BBC, and it was a rank warmongering that was going on.
It's getting really bad, yeah.
And so all of you people out there, and this is the People's Republic of Massachusetts, who thought, oh, thank God, Biden is going to relieve us of this ogre. Good luck with that.
I totally agree with that. I mean, that's part of the problem is that what we're seeing, unfortunately, and if you read viewpoints from anywhere else that are not Western viewpoints, not at least traditionally Western viewpoints, I have a couple of blogs that I look at on a fairly regular basis that are admittedly pro-Russian, and I try to read as many different sides as I can, and you get the stuff coming from Europe, even from the Ukrainians, and they're saying this is ridiculous.
Yes.
We're not about to get invaded.
No. Yeah.
Nobody wants to have a war over here except you people.
If there is an invasion, I will tell you what will cause it. It will be Ukrainian forces, including the Azov, the National Socialist outfit, attacking Donbass.
Probably.
With heavy weapons.
As the Russians have threatened, you do that and we're going to take you out.
Yeah. And that will be the cause. And of course, Blinken will say, see, Blinky's a warmonger for really. I mean, he makes Pompeo look like a pea stick.
I think they're all pretty equal in the stupidity category. Actually, it's interesting that we've got a rotating group of people. Whether one group is Dem, one group is Republican. I mean, we have the same people that are running the foreign policy show now that were committing the atrocities in Libya and various other places, 10 years ago.
Yeah,
it's the same people, except for the fact that Hillary's not running the show.
Oh, the world would
not directly.
Oh, the world would be just, we are the world. Oh, well, we missed it with Hillary.
No, we don't. Not at all.
Oh, well, I mean, outside of threatening a no-fly zone against a nuclear power, she was Mrs. Peace.
Yeah, right. Okay.
My tongue is in my cheek.
If you think about it, if I can kind of jump forward a little bit to World War I. We kind of hinted on some of the issues a lot of the issues that we're talking about actually stem out of World War I, especially in the Middle East. Yeah. What's interesting is that over the years, I've been a lot of reading about the Ottoman Empire in various places. And I think there's a lot of parallels between what they were doing and going through and what we're doing and going through now. I mean, you had their government was overly militaristic to the point where their economy basically depended on, as somebody, I think it was historian Carolyn Finkel, I think said it, they were basically dependent on having a reasonably successful war every so often to keep their economy running. And when they started losing their wars consistently, their economy started falling apart. To the point where the British and the French basically took over their entire treasury.
Oh yeah.
And we're in that same state with outside bankers. Well, the bankers control our treasury. They're not necessarily the British and French, but they're not the U.S. government.
The Ottomans are quite a lesson in not knowing when to stop.
Exactly.
And we're trying to supplant that lesson
I think we
improve it.
Right.
And you know, I mean, I was somewhat of an obstreperous youth. I know you can't believe that.
Nah.
But I like to think one of life's lessons I did learn was maybe sometimes you don't have that fourth pint.
Right.
And maybe stopping at the second.
Probably a good idea.
Probably a good idea.
Probably a good idea.
And the governments very rarely get that. Most governments keep it up until they can't.
That's true.
A number of the books I've read about declinism, which means study of when it's all falling apart.
Right.
Now I don't know if you know who John Bagot Globe was.
Oh yes, right. Okay, right.
He wrote The Search for but The Fate of Empires.
Right.
I forget the first part of it. And he said they basically have 10 generations. Rome actually changed itself 3 times. And they had 3 basically 200 to 50-year cycles where they were really working. The Republic, the Empire, and then the Byzantine. Well, the Byzantine was way off in another place.
Well, the Byzantine Empire did it a couple of times themselves.
Yeah, but their decline, once it started, didn't stop.
No. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things I was thinking about when reading your book and some of the stuff I've read about Byzantine history as well is that if you think about it, the British today are where the Byzantines were around 1300. Basically a city-state with delusions of imperial grandeur. We could be going that route in the next 100 years too, if we're not careful.
We've got bigger problems, I think,
We do.
than the Brits. I don't know. There's a lot of. I've been hearing more about people getting into the discussion of Quigley. What's his name? The guy who wrote Tragedy and Hope.
Okay, I don't think I've ever read that one.
Well, you've got a computer, look at it. Anyway, Tragedy and Hope, it's pretty much a famous book. It was a big influence, supposedly, on Bill Clinton.
Okay.
But he had another book, The Anglo-American Establishment.
Okay.
So where does England start? I mean, well, I'm going to say England because it's, there might be a few Scots and Welsh in it, but it's basically England. Where does it stop and the American establishment begin? Now, this is just rank speculation on my part, but what is the symbiosis between the two? Remember how sycophantic to the American enterprise in Iraq that Tony Blair was?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing getting a knighthood for being a complete savage.
But I saw that recently. Yeah, that was kind of sad. It says a lot. It says, unfortunately, a lot about failing upward, both in Britain and here.
Well, that is government, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
it's actually characteristic of really corrupt governments. If you have good, competent governments, you promote the people who deserve to be promoted. If you have corrupt governments, you promote the people who are incompetent.
Give me some good governments here that do it right.
At the moment, I don't know of any. I think the problem is governments often start that way. How long they last that way is a different matter.
Well, that's part of the club idea. You have your era of growth. You're doing things, maybe because poverty makes you do it. You're doing things right.
That
and
may
then
be true.
You get rich, and then like they say, the first generation makes it, the second generation preserves it, the third generation wastes it, and the fourth generation's gone. Now, there's lots of allusions to that in history. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Arab historian Ibn Khaldun.
I've read some of his stuff.
And he basically says the 4 generations thing, 3 or 4 generations.
I mean, he links it to tribal, what he calls asabiya, which is basically tribal strength and recognitions. And he also obviously ties to some degree, being Muslim, he ties a fair amount of it into religion. But the idea of some sort of a recognition of where your power base makes sense. And that's what I think we're seeing today in many of the Western countries, is that they have lost touch with the fact that the power base is, in fact, the people. Every government relies on the people as their power base, regardless of what they call themselves.
Well,
And they usually fall because they eventually offend the people enough to get overthrown in one way or another.
G.K. Chesterton said one of his columns that I usually have a period of reading somebody for a while, and one of his, he said, the strength of the British nobility lies in the slums.
Okay.
And that's basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
The pyramid is such that it's got to rest on something.
Mm-hmm.
And if the people running it, and I think because of the structure of our society, I think it's really hard. Because we're not going to have a nobility. And the Anglo-Saxon establishment, whether it believed it or not, basically is done and cooked. But it was kind of there as thinking it was a nobility.
Yeah.
And it's gone.
But it seems like there's also a wannabe nobility that's slowly growing among some of the Wall Street type tycoons, some of the tech tycoons,
Yeah,
those people.
yeah.
They want to be nobles,
Good
but
luck.
a lot of people have no respect for that kind of nouveau riche nobility.
Right, yeah. Well,
Whether
we'll
it will
see.
last any, who knows?
I don't see it happening.
Hope
But,
not. Looks like we are just past the 30-minute mark.
yeah,
And honestly, we could keep. I mean, the issues that you raised there we could easily discuss them for probably like 3 hours.
truly, yeah.
So
If you want to conclude it, the host wants to conclude it. I'm the follower.
I'm not in a hurry. If you want to keep going, it's up to you.
But
Honestly,
the people who run the show here have us at 30 minutes, basically.
well, that's fine. In that case, then,
We have.
thank you for taking the time to talk about it. We
No,
could
thank
easily
you.
bring up some of these other issues in the future. Sometimes we do.
We'll bring them up again.
And there's so many things floating around here that, in terms of the American policies that need to be fixed.
Very good. Okay.
Maybe we fix a few of them.
Good, I hope. I can only hope.
Right.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you for doing this.